I was sitting on my back porch with a glass of bourbon when I noticed the steady trickle from my natural spring had slowed to barely a drip. For 3 generations, my family had owned this property in rural Asheville, North Carolina, and that spring had never once run dry. Not through droughts, not through record-breaking summers, not ever. I set down my glass and walked across the meadow to where the water emerged from the rocky hillside, my boots crunching through the late April grass. The source looked fine. Water bubbled up clear and cold like always, but instead of flowing down its natural channel toward my pond and irrigation system, it seemed to just disappear into the ground after a few feet. I crouched down, ran my hand through the cold water, and that's when I felt it. Smooth PVC pipe buried just beneath the surface. My name is Thomas Patterson, and I'd moved back to my grandfather's old farmhouse about 8 months ago after burning out from my job as a civil engineer in Charlotte. The 20 acres of land had been in my family since the 1940s, handed down from my grandfather to my father, and finally to me after Dad passed 2 years back. I'd spent the last several months fixing up the old place, planning to start a small organic vegetable operation. That spring water was essential to everything. It fed my irrigation system, filled the pond where I was raising catfish, and provided drinking water for the small livestock operation I was building. I started digging with my hands, then went back to the shed for a proper shovel. Within 20 minutes, I'd uncovered about 15 feet of 2-inch PVC pipe running from my spring straight south toward the property line. My property line. The line I shared with Meadowbrook Estates, a gated community that had sprung up 3 years ago on what used to be the Morrison farm. I'd never wanted anything to do with that development. When the developers came sniffing around my land, offering ridiculous amounts of money, I'd turn them down flat. This was family land. This was home. They'd eventually bought the Morrison place instead, bulldozed 100 acres of pasture and woodland, and crammed in 80 oversized houses with an ugly clubhouse right in the center. I grabbed my phone and called the county water department. A bored-sounding clerk named Patricia told me I'd need to file a formal complaint and that someone would come out to investigate within 10 business days. I explained that someone had literally stolen my water source, and she repeated the 10 business days thing like a robot reading a script. Fine, I could do my own investigating. I spent the next 3 hours following that pipe. It ran along the edge of my property, about 15 feet in from the border, clearly trying to stay on my land to avoid detection. Whoever installed it had been smart enough to bury it deep and cover their tracks well. But they hadn't counted on a civil engineer with time on his hands and a serious grudge forming. The pipe crossed under my fence line through a carefully concealed hole and continued into Meadowbrook Estates. I couldn't dig on their property without trespassing, but I could walk through the neighborhood like any curious neighbor. The development had pretentious stone pillars at the entrance with the name spelled out in gold letters. I drove my truck through the open gates, noting the fancy security cameras that probably didn't even work. These houses were the kind that tried too hard. Vinyl siding made to look like wood, fake shutters that didn't close, columns that supported nothing. Each one probably cost $500,000, but looked like it would fall apart in 20 years. The streets were named things like Prosperity Lane and Grandeur Circle. I followed the general direction the pipe had been heading and ended up at the clubhouse. And there it was. A massive fountain right in the center of the circular driveway, water shooting up in elaborate patterns, probably running 24 hours a day. My water. Flowing through some HOA president's vanity project while my irrigation system ran dry. I parked and walked into the clubhouse. The lobby was all marble floors and chandelier lighting, completely over the top for a neighborhood amenity. A woman sat behind a desk, mid-50s, with that specific haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." Her name tag read, Susan Miller, HOA president. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she'd rather do anything else. "I'm Thomas Patterson. I own the property adjacent to the development, to the north." Her expression shifted to something between fake sweetness and condescension. "Oh yes, the Patterson land. We've been hoping you'd reconsider our offer. The development would love to expand, and your property would be perfect for Phase 2. "I'm not selling. I'm here because someone installed a pipe on my property and is stealing water from my natural spring." Susan's face went carefully blank. "That's a very serious accusation. It's a fact. I've got a 2-inch PVC pipe running from my spring to your fountain outside. I'm guessing you know something about that." She stood up, smoothing her blazer. "Mr. Patterson, I assure you that Meadowbrook Estates has all proper permits and water rights. Our fountain is supplied by county water." "Then you won't mind if I shut off the valve at the source and see what happens to your fountain?" A flicker of something crossed her face. Anger, maybe, or fear. "I'll have to ask you to leave. This is private property, and if you continue to harass us, I'll call the police." Harass you? Lady, you're stealing my water. I'm going to have to ask you to leave now, Mr. Patterson." She reached for her phone. I left, but not before taking several photos of the fountain with my phone. Back at my truck, I sat and thought. This was deliberate theft of a natural resource. The question was whether Susan knew about it from the beginning, or if it had been the developer who'd installed the pipe, and she'd simply inherited the problem. Either way, I was going to fix it. That evening, I called my cousin Rachel, who practiced environmental law in Raleigh. She listened to my story and let out a low whistle. "Thomas, this is actually a pretty big deal. Water rights in North Carolina are complex, but if they're diverting a natural spring from your property without an easement or agreement, that's theft. It could also be a violation of state water resource laws. What should I do?" "Document everything. Take photos, video, measurements, get a survey done if you can afford it, proving the pipe originates on your property, file a complaint with the county and the State Water Resource Division. And don't touch that pipe yourself. If you damage their property, even if they're in the wrong, it complicates things." "What if I just shut off a valve on my own property?" Rachel was quiet for a moment. "If the valve is on your land, you have every right to control water flow on your property. But Thomas, be careful. HOAs can be vicious, and if they've already committed what amounts to water theft, they might escalate." I thanked her and hung up. Then I spent the next day doing exactly what she suggested. I documented everything, took measurements, drew up engineering diagrams showing the pipe's path from my spring to the property line. I measured the flow rate, noting that the pipe was diverting roughly 60% of my spring's output. That was hundreds of gallons per day, thousands per week. I also did some research on Meadowbrook Estates. The development had been built by Morrison Family Developers, a company run by 3 brothers who'd inherited their father's construction business. The HOA had been handed over to the residents about a year ago, with Susan Miller elected president by a neighborhood that probably regretted that decision within months. On the 3rd day, I got a visit. A sheriff's deputy pulled up my long driveway around noon. He was young, probably late 20s, with a professional demeanor. "Mr. Patterson, I'm Deputy Williams. I need to ask you a few questions about a harassment complaint." "Let me guess. Susan Miller from Meadowbrook Estates?" He nodded. "She says you came to the clubhouse making threats about vandalizing their fountain. Did she mention that they've illegally tapped into my water source and are stealing about 400 gallons a day?" Deputy Williams pulled out a notepad. "Why don't you tell me your side?" I explained everything, showed him the pipe, showed him my documentation. He took notes, asked good questions, and seemed genuinely interested. "Mr. Patterson, I'm not an expert in water rights, but this looks like a civil matter, probably needs to involve the county. Have you filed a formal complaint?" "With the water department, yes, still waiting on them." "Here's my advice, and I'm speaking as someone who grew up around here, not as a deputy. You're within your rights to control water on your property, but if you do anything that could be considered vandalism or trespassing on their land, you're going to be in trouble. Keep everything legal, keep documenting, and let the system work." "And if the system doesn't work?" He gave me a knowing look. "The system usually works eventually. It just takes time." After he left, I sat on the porch and thought about time. How long would my vegetables last without proper irrigation? How long before the pond dried up and the fish died? I'd already invested thousands in this operation, not to mention the emotional investment of carrying on my family's legacy. That night, I made a decision. I was going to trace that pipe to find where they'd installed the connection, and I was going to shut it off at the source, my source, on my property, which was completely legal. The next morning, I started digging. Not the whole pipe, just strategic spots every 50 feet to confirm its path and depth. By afternoon, I'd found what I was looking for. About 40 feet from the spring, still well within my property, there was a valve assembly buried in a concrete box. Someone had done professional work here, which meant this wasn't some amateur operation. This was planned, engineered, and executed by people who knew what they were doing. The valve was accessible with a standard water key. I could shut it off right now, but I wanted to do this right. I called Rachel again. If I document that this valve is on my property and I shut it off, am I in the clear legally? As long as you can prove it's on your land, yes. The water originates on your property, and you have the right to control it. I'd recommend having a surveyor mark it first, just to be absolutely certain. That'll take time. Thomas, I know you're frustrated, but doing this right protects you. Spend the money, get the survey, make it ironclad. I called a surveyor that afternoon. He couldn't come out until the following Tuesday, which was 5 days away. Fine, I could wait 5 more days. But Meadowbrook Estates apparently couldn't wait. On Saturday morning, I woke up to the sound of machinery. I looked out to see a utility truck parked near my fence line and 2 men in hard hats walking my property with equipment. I threw on clothes and headed out. Can I help you, gentlemen? The older one, a guy with a gray beard and a company logo on his shirt reading Morrison Family Developers, looked up. Just doing some routine maintenance. There's a water line that runs through here. On my property, without my permission? We have an easement, he said, not meeting my eyes. Show me the paperwork. I don't carry that with me. You'd need to talk to the office. Get off my land, now. The younger guy looked nervous, but Gray Beard stood his ground. Sir, we're just doing our job. If you interfere with utility maintenance, that's a crime. And trespassing is also a crime. You've got 60 seconds to be back on the other side of that fence. I pulled out my phone and started recording. That got them moving. They packed up their equipment and left, but not before Graybeard said, You're making a mistake, Patterson. No, you made the mistake when you stole my water. I called the sheriff's office and filed a trespassing complaint. Deputy Williams came out again, took my statement, and reviewed my video footage. I'll file the report, but Mr. Patterson, this is escalating. These HOA disputes can get ugly. I'm not the one who started it. No, but you might be the one who finishes it. Just be smart. That afternoon, I got a certified letter from a law firm in Asheville. The letter, on behalf of Meadowbrook Estates HOA, informed me that I was interfering with essential utilities and demanded that I cease all harassment and allow access for maintenance. It also threatened legal action if I disrupted water service to the community. I photographed the letter and sent it to Rachel. She called me within an hour. Thomas, this is actually good news. How is being threatened with a lawsuit good news? Because they're admitting there's a water line running from your property. They're claiming an easement they almost certainly don't have. This is leverage. I'm going to draft a response, and I'm also going to file a formal complaint with the state. This is bigger than a civil dispute now. They're potentially violating state water resource laws. How long will this take? Weeks, maybe months. The state doesn't move fast. Rachel, I can't wait months. My crops are dying. I've got fish that need that pond filled. This farm is my livelihood. She was quiet for a moment. Get that survey done. Once you have proof the valve is on your land, shut it off. Document everything. If they sue, we'll countersue for theft, trespass, and whatever else we can think of. But Thomas, once you do this, you need to be ready for war. I'm ready. The surveyor came out on Tuesday morning. His name was Ken Bradshaw, and he'd been surveying in Buncombe County for 30 years. He walked the property line with GPS equipment and old survey maps, taking measurements and driving stakes. By early afternoon, he confirmed what I already knew. The valve assembly was 17 feet inside my property line. He marked it with an official survey stake and provided me with a notarized document confirming the location. I had everything I needed. That evening, I walked out to the valve with a water key, my phone recording everything. I stated clearly for the camera, This is Thomas Patterson on my property at 847 Mountain Springs Road, Asheville, North Carolina. I'm standing at a valve assembly that is located 17 feet inside my property line, as confirmed by licensed surveyor Ken Bradshaw on May 6, 2026. This valve controls water flow from a natural spring that originates on my property. I'm now exercising my right to control water resources on my own land. I inserted the key and turned the valve clockwise. It was stiff from being open so long, but it moved. I shut it completely, then pulled out the key. Done. I went back to the house and waited. It didn't take long. 40 minutes later, my phone rang from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was Susan Miller, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. Mr. Patterson, our fountain has stopped working. If you've tampered with our water supply, you will be hearing from our attorneys. This is theft, and we will prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. I saved the message. She'd just admitted the fountain was connected to my water. 10 minutes after that, someone started pounding on my door. I looked through the window to see Susan standing on my porch with two other people, a man and a woman, both probably HOA board members. I opened the door but kept the screen latched. Can I help you? You shut off our water. Susan's face was red, a vein pulsing in her temple. I shut off a valve on my property, controlling water that originates on my property. What you do or don't have running through your fountain is not my concern. That's community property. You're violating our utility easement. Show me the easement. We don't have to show you anything. Turn that water back on right now or I'm calling the police. Call them, I'll wait. The man with her, tall and balding with an expensive watch, stepped forward. Mr. Patterson, let's be reasonable here. We're willing to discuss compensation for the water usage. Now you want to discuss it? After stealing my water for how long? 2 years? 3? The woman, younger than Susan but with the same entitled energy, chimed in. We didn't steal anything. The developer installed that system. We just inherited it. Then your developer committed theft and you've been benefiting from it. Either way, my water stays on my property. Susan's voice went shrill. Do you have any idea how much that fountain cost? It's the centerpiece of our community. Property values depend on it. You should have thought about that before you tapped into someone else's water supply without permission. This isn't over, Patterson. Susan turned and stormed off, the other two following. I closed the door and sat down. My hands were shaking, adrenaline making my heart race. I'd just declared war on an HOA with money and lawyers and nothing better to do than make my life miserable. But I was right, and I had the law on my side. The next morning, I had another visit from Deputy Williams. He looked tired. Mr. Patterson, I've been getting calls about you all morning. Let me guess, Susan Miller. And 3 other HOA board members and the county commissioner who lives in Meadowbrook Estates and a lawyer from some firm in Asheville. You've stirred up a hornet's nest. All I did was control water on my own property. He held up his hands. I know. I've read your documentation, and I believe you're in the right. But I have to follow up on complaints. They're saying you've cut off water to the entire development. That's a lie. They have county water service. I shut off an illegal pipe that was diverting water from my natural spring. Their fountain doesn't work anymore, that's all. Can you prove the valve is on your property? I showed him the surveyor's report. He read it carefully, then nodded. Okay, this backs up your story. But Mr. Patterson, I have to tell you, this is going to get worse before it gets better. These people have money and influence. You need to be prepared. I'm prepared. After he left, I checked on my irrigation system. With the valve closed, water was flowing normally again. The pond was refilling. My vegetables, which had been wilting, would recover. Everything was as it should be. That afternoon, I got served with a lawsuit. A process server showed up at my door with papers. Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, was suing me for breach of easement, interference with utilities, and seeking an emergency injunction to force me to restore water service. I called Rachel immediately. She had me scan and email the documents. This is garbage, she said after reviewing them. They're claiming an easement that doesn't exist. We'll file a response and a countersuit. Thomas, you need to hire me officially. This is going to be a real fight. What are we looking at, cost-wise? Could be anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000, depending on how far they take it. I felt sick. I didn't have that kind of money lying around. The farm was just getting started, and I'd sunk most of my savings into equipment and infrastructure. Do it anyway. I'm not letting them steal from me. Over the next week, things escalated rapidly. Rachel filed our response, denying all claims and filing a countersuit for trespassing, theft of water resources, and property damage. She also filed a formal complaint with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, Water Resources Division, documenting the illegal water diversion. The HOA responded by spreading rumors through the neighborhood. Suddenly, I was the bad guy who was trying to destroy property values. I started getting angry letters in my mailbox from Meadowbrook residents I'd never met, accusing me of being selfish and unreasonable. Someone spray-painted "water thief" on my mailbox. I filed another police report. Then they went after my business. I'd been selling vegetables at the Asheville Farmers Market on weekends, starting to build a customer base. A group of HOA residents showed up with signs claiming my produce was watered with contaminated runoff and was unsafe. It was complete nonsense, but it scared away customers. I filed a restraining order against Susan Miller and 3 other HOA board members, asking the court to prohibit harassment. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, the State Water Resources Division sent an investigator. Her name was Margaret Torres, and she was exactly the kind of no-nonsense bureaucrat I needed on my side. She spent an entire day on my property, documenting the spring, tracing the pipe, testing water quality, and reviewing all my documentation. "Mr. Patterson, this is one of the clearest cases of illegal water diversion I've seen," she said as she packed up her equipment. "The HOA has no permits, no easement, no legal right to this water. I'll be filing a violation notice and they'll have 30 days to respond." What happens after 30 days? If they don't remedy the situation, we can pursue fines and legal action. The state takes water rights very seriously, especially with natural springs. This is a protected resource. How much are the fines? Could be up to $10,000 per day, depending on the severity and duration of the violation. That was the first good news I'd heard in weeks. The HOA's emergency injunction hearing happened on a Thursday morning in Asheville. I sat with Rachel at the plaintiff's table while Susan Miller sat with her lawyer, a slick guy in a $3,000 suit named Richard Pembroke. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Judge Catherine Foster, reviewed the filings with a skeptical expression. Pembroke argued that the fountain was essential infrastructure, that my actions were causing property values to plummet, and that the easement had been established by prior use. Rachel calmly dismantled every argument. She presented the surveyor's report showing the valve was on my property. She presented historical property records showing no easement had ever been filed. She presented the Water Division's preliminary findings of illegal diversion. Judge Foster listened to everything, then fixed Susan's lawyer with a hard stare. "Mr. Pembroke, do you have any documentation of an easement or water rights agreement?" "Your Honor, the easement was created by prescription, through continuous use over several years. In North Carolina, a prescriptive easement requires 15 years of continuous, open, and notorious use. This development is only 3 years old." The developer established the connection, Your Honor, which means the developer may have committed theft and your clients inherited the liability. This court will not force Mr. Patterson to provide water from his property to yours without proper legal foundation. Your emergency injunction is denied. Susan made a strangled sound. Pembroke looked like he'd been slapped. "Furthermore," Judge Foster continued, "I'm concerned about the allegations of harassment against Mr. Patterson. Mrs. Miller, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order prohibiting you and other HOA board members from contacting Mr. Patterson, except through attorneys. If I hear about vandalism, intimidation, or interference with his business, I'll hold you in contempt. Do we understand each other?" Susan's face had gone from red to white. "Yes, Your Honor." Outside the courthouse, Rachel was grinning. That was beautiful. Foster is tough but fair. She saw right through their nonsense. What happens now? We proceed with the countersuit, and with the State Water Division's investigation ongoing, the HOA is in serious trouble. They're going to want to settle. I don't want money. I want them to leave me alone. You might get both. That weekend, Things got worse before they got better. Someone cut my fence in 3 places, letting my chickens out. Half of them were killed by predators before I found them. I filed another police report with photos of the cut fence. The wire had been cleanly snipped with tools, not broken naturally. Then, someone dumped motor oil in my pond. I discovered it Monday morning, a rainbow sheen covering the surface. The catfish I'd been raising were dying. I called the sheriff's office, and this time they sent out a detective. Detective Sarah Brennan was in her 40s, sharp-eyed and thorough. She took samples of the oil, photographed everything, and interviewed me for over an hour. "Mr. Patterson, this is criminal mischief at minimum, possibly environmental crimes. Do you have any idea who might be responsible?" "I've been in a dispute with the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. It's been escalating." "I'm familiar with your situation. Deputy Williams briefed me. Do you have security cameras?" "Not yet. I didn't think I needed them." "Get some. This kind of thing rarely stops on its own. People with grudges tend to escalate." I spent $2,000 I couldn't afford on a comprehensive security system. Cameras covering all approaches to the house, the spring, the pond, and the fence lines. Everything recording to a cloud service. 3 days later, the cameras caught someone. 2 men late at night approaching the valve assembly with tools. I called 911 immediately and stayed inside, watching on my phone as the men tried to open the concrete box. Sheriff's deputies arrived within 10 minutes. The men ran, but they didn't get far. Both were apprehended on my property with bolt cutters and a water key. I drove out to meet the deputies. One of them was Deputy Williams, who looked grimly satisfied. "Mr. Patterson, meet Michael Morrison and James Morrison. They say they're with Morrison Family Developers." I recognized one of them. Gray beard, the guy who'd tried to do maintenance before. "What were you doing on my property?" Michael, the older one, was defiant even in handcuffs. "Trying to fix a mistake. That fountain is our work, our reputation. You're destroying years of effort." "By stealing my water?" "We had approval from the previous owner. Morrison sold us that easement when we bought his land." "Then you have documentation, right? A legal easement on file with the county?" His silence was answer enough. Deputy Williams shook his head. "Gentlemen, you're under arrest for trespassing and attempted criminal mischief. You have the right to remain silent." As they were driven away, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and unease. This was spiraling into something bigger than I had anticipated. The next morning, Detective Brennan called me. "Mr. Patterson, the Morrison brothers are claiming they installed that pipe system with permission from Dale Morrison, the previous owner of what's now Meadowbrook Estates. But when we checked, there's no recorded easement and no written agreement. Dale Morrison died 2 years ago, so we can't verify their story." "So they're lying." "Possibly, or they had a handshake deal they never formalized. Either way, they have no legal right to divert water from your property. The DA is reviewing charges for the water diversion itself, in addition to last night's trespassing." "What kind of charges?" "Potentially theft, fraud, maybe environmental crimes depending on what the state water division finds. These things take time, but the Morrison brothers are in real trouble." That afternoon, I got a call from Richard Pembroke, the HOA's lawyer. "Mr. Patterson, I'd like to discuss a settlement." "I'm listening." "The HOA is prepared to offer you $50,000 in exchange for granting a permanent easement for the water line." "No. Mr. Patterson, that's a generous offer. It's my water on my land that you've been stealing. You want me to give you permission to keep stealing it for a one-time payment?" "No." "What would it take?" I thought for a moment. "Here's what I want. The HOA admits in writing that the water diversion was illegal. They pay for all my legal fees, all costs associated with the security system, and compensation for the poisoned pond and killed chickens. They remove the entire pipe system from my property and restore the land. And Susan Miller resigns as HOA president." Pembroke was quiet. "That's a lot to ask. It's less than what a jury would award me. I'll take it to the board." 2 days later, Rachel called with news. "Thomas, you're not going to believe this. The State Water Division expanded their investigation and found that Morrison Family Developers never had permits for any of their water infrastructure in the development. The whole system was built without proper approval. There are violations going back to the original construction." "What does that mean?" It means the state is coming down hard. They're looking at hundreds of thousands in fines. And it gets better. The Morrison brothers violated the terms of their contractors' licenses by doing unpermitted work. They could lose their licenses entirely. Jesus. The HOA is panicking. They're liable for the ongoing violations even though they didn't install the system. Pembroke called me this morning with a revised settlement offer. What are they offering? Everything you asked for, plus $75,000 in damages. They want this to go away before it destroys the whole development. I sat down hard on my porch steps. $75,000, legal fees covered, the pipe removed, an admission of wrongdoing. What's the catch? You have to agree not to pursue further legal action against the HOA specifically. The state can still go after them, and you can still pursue criminal charges against individuals, but you can't sue the HOA again over this incident. And Susan Miller? She's already resigned. Turns out the rest of the board voted her out when they realized how much liability she'd exposed them to. I thought about my grandfather, who'd worked this land for 50 years. My father, who'd taught me to respect the property and protect what was ours. They'd have told me to stand on principle, but they'd also have been practical men who understood when to accept victory. Tell them I'll take it, but I want the pipe removal supervised by an engineer I hire, at their expense. I want to make sure my land is properly restored. Done. I'll draw up the agreement. The settlement was finalized 3 weeks later. The HOA paid $92,000 total, once my chosen engineer's fees were included. A crew spent 4 days excavating and removing every foot of pipe, then properly backfilling and reseeding the disturbed areas. I stood watching them work, arms crossed, making sure they did it right. The foreman, a young guy who clearly had no involvement in the original mess, apologized multiple times. Man, I can't believe they did this to you. We're a legitimate company, and when we found out the whole story, half of us wanted to quit. But the Morrisons are out, bought out by their business partners, so at least we're not working for criminals anymore. What happened to them? Michael and James, facing charges, lost their licenses and the business partnership dissolved. They're probably looking at prison time if the DA pushes it. The criminal case moved slowly, as these things do. The Morrison brothers were charged with trespassing, attempted criminal mischief, theft of natural resources, and fraud. The DA added environmental violations based on the State Water Division's findings. Their trial was set for October, 6 months away. I'd have to testify, but Rachel assured me it was a solid case. In the meantime, life started returning to normal. My spring flowed properly again, my irrigation system worked, and I restocked the pond with new catfish fingerlings. The vegetables I'd nearly lost recovered, and I had a successful late spring and summer harvest. The farmers' market crowd welcomed me back once word spread about what had happened. Turns out, a lot of people despised HOAs and loved the story of someone standing up to them. I became a minor local celebrity, which was embarrassing but good for business. Susan Miller moved out of Meadowbrook Estates in July. I heard through the grapevine that she'd become so toxic in the community that people were avoiding her. The new HOA president was a retired accountant named George Chen, who apparently ran the board with common sense and transparency. He sent me a personal letter apologizing for the previous board's actions. In August, I was working in the garden when I heard a car coming up the drive. I tensed, still a bit jumpy from everything that had happened, but it was just Deputy Williams, now out of uniform. "Mr. Patterson, hope you don't mind me stopping by off duty." "Not at all. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to let you know the Morrison brothers took a plea deal. They're pleading guilty to reduce charges. Michael gets 2 years, James gets 18 months, and they both have to pay restitution to you and the state." "How much restitution?" $20,000 to you, $150,000 to the state, plus they're permanently banned from any contracting work in North Carolina." I felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. "It's over then." "Pretty much. Wanted to also say I respect how you handled this. A lot of people would have just rolled over or done something stupid that got them in trouble. You fought it the right way." "I had good help?" After he left, I walked out to the spring. The water flowed clear and cold, following its natural path, just as it had for thousands of years before my family owned this land, and as it would for thousands more after we were gone. Someone had tried to steal it, to divert it for their own vanity, but in the end, the water found its way home. I thought about the last year, the stress and the fights and the money spent on lawyers and surveyors and security cameras. It had been worth it, not just for the principle, but because some things are worth protecting. This land, this water, this connection to my family's past, they mattered more than convenience or money or avoiding conflict. The fountain in Meadowbrook Estates was gone now, I'd heard. The HOA had it removed entirely rather than pay for proper county water connections. The circular driveway looked empty without it, but that wasn't my problem. They'd learned an expensive lesson about stealing from their neighbors. I spent the rest of August and September preparing for fall planting. The catfish in the pond were growing well. The vegetable operation was actually turning a profit, small but real. I'd started offering farm tours for school groups, teaching kids about sustainable agriculture and the importance of water conservation. One of those groups asked about the pipes they'd heard about, the ones that had been removed from the property. I told them a simplified version of the story, appropriate for 10-year-olds, about standing up for what's right and protecting natural resources. Their teacher, a woman about my age named Jennifer Olson, stayed after to talk. She thanked me for the tour, then asked if I'd be interested in having coffee sometime. I said yes, surprised and pleased. Maybe good things came from standing your ground, even things you didn't expect. In October, I attended the sentencing hearing for Michael and James Morrison. The courtroom was mostly empty, just lawyers and a few reporters. The brothers looked diminished somehow, smaller than they'd seemed that night on my property. The judge gave them the agreed-upon sentences, and before leading them away, allowed them to make statements. James, the younger brother, spoke first. I want to apologize to Mr. Patterson. We were wrong. We thought we were cutting corners to save money and time, but we were stealing, plain and simple. I'm sorry for the harm we caused. Michael was less conciliatory. We built something beautiful, he said. That development brought jobs and growth to the area. One little pipe shouldn't have been such a big deal. But I acknowledge we broke the law, and I accept the consequences. Even in defeat, he didn't really get it. It wasn't about the size of the pipe. It was about respect for other people's property, for the law, for doing things right. After the hearing, Rachel and I went to lunch at a barbecue place downtown. Well, Thomas, you did it. You won completely. How does it feel? I thought about it, working through pulled pork and hush puppies. Honestly, I'm just glad it's over. I didn't want to fight them. I just wanted to farm. You did more than farm. You stood up to institutional bullying and won. That matters. Maybe, but I'd rather have never had to do it in the first place. She smiled. That's what makes you one of the good ones. You didn't want revenge or glory. You just wanted what was yours. We finished lunch, and she headed back to Raleigh. I drove home to the farm, to my 20 acres of family land, with its natural spring flowing free and clear. Jennifer came over that evening for dinner. I cooked steaks from a local farm, vegetables from my garden, and we ate on the porch as the sun set over the mountains. She asked about the whole saga, and I told her the full story, not holding back the stressful parts or the moments I'd been afraid it would all fall apart. You know what's crazy? She said. I live in a neighborhood with an HOA, and they're constantly sending nasty letters about lawn height and mailbox colors. Hearing your story makes me want to move out to the country. There's room out here, I said, then immediately felt my face go hot. That had sounded like an invitation, which maybe it was, but we'd only been on 2 dates. She laughed, not unkindly. Maybe someday. For now, I'll just enjoy visiting. As fall turned toward winter, the farm settled into a comfortable rhythm. I winterized the irrigation system, harvested the last of the vegetables, and started planning for the next season. The catfish would be ready for harvest in spring. I was looking at expanding into pastured chickens, replacing the ones I'd lost and then some. The security cameras stayed up, but I checked them less and less. Nobody from Meadowbrook Estates bothered me anymore. The new HOA board had their hands full, dealing with the fallout from the water violations and trying to rebuild trust with the county. That was their problem, not mine. On Christmas Eve, I was sitting by the fire when my phone rang. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. Mr. Patterson, this is George Chen, HOA president at Meadowbrook. I tensed instinctively. What can I do for you, Mr. Chen? I wanted to call personally to wish you happy holidays and to let you know that our community has completed all the remediation work required by the state. We're finally in full compliance with water regulations. That's good to hear. It cost us over $400,000, all told. Fines, legal fees, infrastructure upgrades. It nearly bankrupted the HOA. I didn't know what to say to that. But, he continued, it was the right thing to do. We were built on a foundation of fraud, and that needed to be corrected. So thank you in a way. You forced us to do what should have been done from the start. I didn't do it for you. I know, you did it for yourself, for your land, but the result is the same. We're better now, more honest. I just wanted you to know that. After we hung up, I sat looking at the fire. $400,000, lives disrupted, reputations destroyed, brothers going to prison. All because someone thought they could cut corners and steal from their neighbor. But also, a community forced to confront its corruption, a development now operating legally, a spring flowing free, a farm thriving. I thought about my grandfather again, about the stories he used to tell of the old days when a handshake meant something and neighbors looked out for each other. He'd also told stories about neighbors who'd tried to cheat him. Fence lines moved in the night, timber stolen, water rights disputed. He'd fought those battles too, always standing firm on what was right. The land endures, he used to say. People come and go, but the land endures. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Merry Christmas Eve. Still coming over tomorrow? I smiled and texted back. Wouldn't miss it. Outside, snow was starting to fall, light flakes drifting past the porch lights. I walked out to the spring one more time, watching the water bubble up from the rocks, constant and pure. In the moonlight, I could see where they'd excavated the pipe, the scars in the earth already fading as grass and moss reclaimed the ground. By next year, you wouldn't be able to tell anything had happened. The land would heal, as it always did. I stood there in the cold, listening to the water, feeling connected to this place in a way that went deeper than ownership or property lines. This was home. This was heritage. This was worth protecting. And I had protected it. Whatever came next, farming successes or failures, relationship developments with Jennifer, new conflicts or peaceful years, I'd done the one thing that mattered most. I'd stood my ground when someone tried to take what was mine. I'd fought legally, documented everything, and won completely. The spring would keep flowing, the farm would keep growing, and I'd keep working this land, honoring my family's legacy and building something worth passing down. That was enough. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat by the fire until I fell asleep in my grandfather's old chair, content in a way I hadn't been in years. The battle was over. The water was mine. The land was safe. Everything else would work itself out in time.